It is the 18th of October, 1016. Prince Canute of Denmark is facing the Anglo-Saxon army at Assandun in Essex. He had first come to England with his father, King Sweyn Forkbeard, in 1013. After Sweyn's sudden death in 1014, the English drove Canute back to Denmark, but he returned in 1015 to renew his claim to the crown. By autumn 1016, Canute was back with reinforcements and swiftly subdued much of northern and eastern England. However, he still faced the formidable Edmund Ironside, the warrior king who had already beaten the Scandinavians in several encounters, including at Otford in Kent. At Assandun, however, the Danes would gradually gain the upper hand, and the departure of Edric Striona and his men would help turn the battle in Canute's favour. Edmund would be forced to make peace and divide the kingdom, but his death a few weeks later would leave Canute sole king of England. He would go on to rule both Denmark and Norway as well, becoming one of the most powerful men in Europe. This is the story of Canute the Great, ruler of the North Sea Empire. The man known to history as King Canute was likely born in the decade between 990 and 1000 AD. He was born in Denmark, but his date and place of birth are otherwise unknown. Canute's father, Sweyn Forkbeard, had become King of Denmark in the mid-980s after overthrowing his father Harald Bluetooth. At the turn of the millennium, Sweyn had become ruler of Norway, and he was to conquer England shortly before his death in February 1014. The identity of Canute's mother remains the subject of considerable scholarly debate.
If you want the chance to win up to $500 in Bass Pro Shop gift cards, stay tuned, because this one is actually pretty interesting. I've been trying out Medal Hunter. It's amazing. And there's a giveaway running at the moment with more than $30,000 worth of Bass Pro Shop gift cards up for grabs. And the best thing is that everyone who takes part wins something. The first thing you need to do is download Medal Hunter, which is free on iOS and Android. It's a PvP shooting game where you go head-to-head against another player over 3 rounds. There's no auto-aim, so it actually comes down to timing, anticipation, and how accurately you can place your shot. There are also 9 different locations to play through, including Pearl Harbor, Warsaw, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, with different types of weapons and shooting modes. You can collect and upgrade your gunners, improve your weapons, build your haven, and work your way up through the leagues and club rankings. Once you've downloaded the game, you need to unlock the different locations. Location 2 gives you your first spin, and then unlocking location 4, 7, and 9 gives you additional spins. Every spin wins a prize. To enter, you'll need your player ID, and then you simply head over to mh-challenge.com. And remember, there's more than $30,000 in Bass Pro Shop gift cards in the prize pool, with prizes ranging from $25 all the way up to the $500 jackpot. There's also a special welcome package available when you use my personal gift code in the Medal Hunter store. Just go to the main menu, open the store, scroll right to the bottom and enter the code you can see on screen. The giveaway closes on September 13th, so you've got until then to get involved. If you download Medal Hunter, have a go at the game and spin the wheel. Let me know in the comments what you won. I'm genuinely interested to see how everyone gets on. So, download Medal Hunter, use my code for the bonus welcome package, unlock those arenas, and head over to mh-challenge.com to spin the wheel. Good luck.
According to the contemporary German chronicler Dietmar of Meersburg, Canute's mother was the sister of King Bolesław I of Poland, also known as Bolesław the Brave. Her name was believed to be Świętosława, on the basis that she had a daughter by that name, but she is more often identified with Gunhild of Wenden, a Slavic princess mentioned in Scandinavian sources. Canute's mother also bore Sweyn a brother named Harald, who would later become King Harald II of Denmark. Very little is known about Canute's childhood and youth. Dietmar of Meersburg claims that Canute and Harald's mother separated from Sweyn and returned to Poland. The brothers remained at Sweyn's court in Denmark. The Danish kingdom consisted of the Jutland Peninsula in the west, the islands of Sjælland and Funen in the centre, and the region of Skåne in what is now southwestern Sweden. The political organization of the Kingdom of Denmark was extremely decentralized, with local lords often fighting each other and challenging royal authority. From his power base at Jelling in eastern Jutland, Canute's grandfather Harald Bluetooth reunited the Danish kingdom and converted to Christianity in the 960s. This meant that Canute and his family were Christians, although most of the Danish population would have continued to worship local pagan gods alongside the Christian god. While Harald's father, Gorm the Old, is the first Danish king to appear in the archaeological record, the chronicler Adam of Bremen writes that the royal dynasty was founded by a warlord named Harthacnut, who came from Norway. While Harthacnut is usually considered Harald's grandfather, Canute's biographer Timothy Bolton argues that Harthacnut and Gorm were the same person. While Harald Bluetooth had consolidated power over regional lords by building ring forts as statements of royal power in the mid-980s, he faced a rebellion from his son Sweyn, who may have been more sympathetic to local lords who opposed the introduction of Christianity. Sweyn's forces were triumphant, and Harald died in exile after being mortally wounded in battle. Harald's body was buried at the Church of the Holy Trinity in Roskilde in Sjælland, the new seat of royal power. Sweyn also founded the new towns of Viborg in Jutland and Lund in Skåne as new bases of royal authority. Canute was born into the Danish family at a time when his father's violent overthrow of his grandfather was still in recent memory. War and conquest ran through the family's veins, and Canute may have understood from a young age that he would have to be a conqueror to make his name. Canute first appears in the historical record in 1013 when he joined his father's invasion of England. While Canute is sometimes believed to be Sweyn's oldest son, most sources indicate that Harald was older, since Harald governed Denmark while his father was on campaign and inherited the Danish throne after Sweyn's death. Canute would have found the prospect of ruling in England far more appealing than being his brother's junior partner and potential rival in Denmark. In the decades before Sweyn's invasion of 1013, the Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of England had encountered a series of devastating Scandinavian raids. These raiders, known to history as Vikings, had been raiding English shores since the late 8th century AD, most notably with the sack of Lindisfarne in 793. By 878, King Alfred of Wessex was the last man standing in the face of a great Viking army when he turned the tables by defeating the Danish warlord Guthrum at the Battle of Edington, forcing him to accept Christianity as his vassal. Under the terms of the treaty, Alfred and Guthrum divided England into two, with the northeast under Guthrum known as the Danelaw. By the 920s, Alfred's grandson Athelstan had subjugated the Danes and taken control of most of England. While the English kingdom continued to thrive under the Wessex dynasty, the death of the capable King Edgar in 975 led to political instability as Edgar's eldest son, King Edward, was assassinated while hunting in March 978. The throne passed to Edward's half-brother Ethelred, who is known to history by the memorable but unflattering nickname of Ethelred the Unready. The epithet means ill-advised, since Ethelred's multi-decade reign was characterized by his inability to respond effectively to Viking raids. The attacks began in 980 and reached a climax with the defeat of an English army at the Battle of Maldon in 991 by the Norwegian warrior Olaf Tryggvason. Following the defeat at Maldon, Ethelred recognized that he was unable to defeat the Viking raiders in battle and began paying them off. The protection money came to be known as Danegeld, though the early raids were unconnected to the Danish crown. The payments were sufficiently lucrative for Olaf Tryggvason to stop his raids on England and set his sights on the crown of Norway, which he claimed in 995. In Olaf's absence, other ambitious Scandinavian warriors were encouraged to attack England, including Sweyn Forkbeard. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Olaf and Sweyn had joined forces to attack London in 994. The two Scandinavian rulers soon fell out, and in the year 1000, Sweyn defeated Olaf to become King of Norway. As the raids on England resumed in the new millennium, King Ethelred sought to strengthen his position by marrying Emma, the 17-year-old daughter of Duke Richard I of Normandy. Meanwhile, fears of a Danish fifth column in England led Ethelred to order the massacre of large numbers of Danish settlers on St. Brice's Day, the 13th of November, 1002. According to legend, one of Sweyn's sisters was among the victims of the massacre, and the atrocity motivated Sweyn's desire to intensify his raiding activities. The historian Wayne Bartlett observes that there had been plenty of Viking raids against England before 1002, but acknowledges that the St. Brice's Day massacre would have invited Danish retribution. In August 1009, a Danish warlord from Skåne named Thorkel the Tall landed in Kent with a large army and marched on Canterbury. He was initially paid off, but occupied the city 2 years later in September 1011. In 1012, Ethelred paid Thorkel a large sum of Danegeld to employ him and 45 ships as mercenaries. Timothy Bolton argues that the wealth and power enjoyed by Thorkel following his agreement with Ethelred posed a threat to Sweyn in Denmark, and this motivated Sweyn to launch his invasion of England in 1013. Unlike the raids in the preceding decades, Sweyn hoped to conquer England and take control of the kingdom himself. This was also the first time Canute accompanied his father to England. He was most probably in his late teens in 1013 and had been too young to join his father's previous expeditions. While the Danes landed at Sandwich in Kent, Sweyn recognized that the power base of the Wessex dynasty was in the south and quickly moved north, where there was a large population of settlers of Scandinavian descent. Sweyn set up camp at Gainsborough in Lincolnshire. where he received the submission of Earl Uhtred of Northumbria and other lords in northeastern England. Having taken control of the Danelaw, Sweyn moved beyond its frontiers, occupying Oxford and Winchester in the Wessex heartland. While Ethelred at Thorkel successfully defended London, the city submitted to Sweyn after the Danes captured Bath. Queen Emma took refuge at her brother Richard II's court in Normandy, while Ethelred retreated to the Isle of Wight. In the meantime, Sweyn fostered dynastic links with the English nobility by arranging for the marriage of his son Canute and Lady Alfhifu of Northampton, the daughter of a powerful noble from Mercia in central England. With the English kingdom under his control, Sweyn planned his coronation at York in February 1014, but died unexpectedly at Gainsborough on the 3rd of February. While Canute inherited command of the Danish army, the English lords invited Ethelred to reclaim his kingdom. An English army caught Canute unprepared and defeated the Danes, forcing the Danish prince to return home to Denmark, where his brother was now King Harold II. Canute's wife, Alfhifu, was initially left behind in England, but soon joined her husband in Denmark. Canute briefly entered into a power-sharing arrangement with Harold, but recognized that he was unlikely to be king himself. He formed an alliance with the Norwegian Earl Erik Hakonsson and awaited an opportunity to return to England. Rather than taking advantage of the respite offered by Sweyn's death, the English court soon fell to infighting as Ethelred's eldest son Edmund Ironside rebelled against his father in 1015. Meanwhile, Thorkel the Tall sailed from England to Denmark and offered to support Canute's invasion of England. In summer 1015, Canute, Thorkel and Erik attacked southern England. King Ethelred fell seriously ill shortly afterwards, and Prince Edmund took command of the English forces. Earl Uhtred of Northumbria initially allied himself with Edmund, but as the Scandinavians marched north, the Earl attempted to change sides. Canute accepted his surrender, but executed him shortly thereafter and placed his ally Erik in charge of Northumbria. By the time Canute returned south, Ethelred had died on the 23rd of April 1016, and Edmund was elected king. While London held out against the Danes, and Edmund proved a capable military leader while operating in southwestern England, his cause was undermined by the presence of English defectors among Canute's ranks. Edmund appeared to have the upper hand as he drove Canute's army into East Anglia, but was defeated at Assandun. According to the subsequent partition treaty signed by Edmund and Canute, Edmund retained Wessex in the southwest, Canute obtained Mercia in the Midlands, and Erik was confirmed as ruler of Northumbria. The arrangement was short-lived, as Edmund died on the 30th of November, aged 25. Later chroniclers claim that the king was poisoned or murdered, but it is more likely that Edmund had succumbed to battle wounds sustained in the recent campaign against the Danes. After Edmund's death, Canute summoned the Witan, or Royal Council, and was elected king of the whole country. Many Englishmen and women would have welcomed the return of political stability under Canute. Unlike some of his fellow Scandinavian raiders, Canute's Christian faith enabled him to gain greater acceptance among the English. The young king recognized that in order to maintain order, he had to balance the interests of his new English subjects with those of his Scandinavian warriors who expected to be rewarded with the spoils of the successful campaign. While Ethelred and Edmund were dead, they left behind surviving children who were potential claimants to the English throne. Soon after his accession, Canute sought to calm the anxieties of his English subjects by issuing pronouncements protecting their land and property. In 1017, he rewarded powerful allies by granting Eric and Thorkel the earldoms of Northumbria and East Anglia, respectively. Canute placed Wessex under his direct rule and placed Edric Streona in charge of Western Mercia. While Canute may have owed his victory at Assandun to Edric, the latter's reputation for treachery meant that he could not be trusted, and he was executed in December 1017. The earldom of Mercia soon passed to Leofwine and later his son Leofric, who would become one of the leading men in the kingdom by the 1030s. The removal of Edric enabled Canute to grant estates in Mercia to his Scandinavian allies. In addition to the elimination of Edric, Canute purged several other high-ranking English nobles who had opposed him and sent the late Edmund Ironside's sons, Edward and Edmund, into exile. The changing political landscape also led Canute to marry for a second time. By this stage, his wife, Lady Alfifu, had already bore him 2 sons named Swein and Harold after his father and grandfather, respectively. In 1017, Canute married Emma of Normandy, the widow of the late King Ethelred. The union between the two strengthened Canute's links to the Wessex dynasty, and Emma would have enabled her new husband to gain greater acceptance among the English nobility. By making Emma his queen, Canute may also have hoped to protect himself from any challenges to his throne from Ethelred and Emma's sons, Alfred and Edward. The arrangement also suited Emma, who exchanged her exile in Normandy to become Queen of England for a second time. By 1018, Canute had eliminated the most urgent threats to his rule in England and was confident enough to levy a tribute of £72,000 on his English subjects. This punitive sum was collected very rapidly, often forcing landowners to sell off their estates because they could not pay. An additional tax was raised on London, which had been staunchly in favour of the Wessex dynasty and resisted the Danes with greater vigour and success compared to the rest of the country. Canute guaranteed his safety in London by posting a permanent Scandinavian garrison on the south bank of the Thames, where their presence survives in churches dedicated to Scandinavian saints named Olaf and Magnus. Canute used the sum he received to pay off the remainder of his invasion army, whom he sent back to Denmark. While the initial cost was punitive, the payment was ultimately advantageous to the English, since they would be secure from further Scandinavian raids. Canute was becoming an increasingly astute politician and recognized the importance of cultivating relations with the English clergy. One of his most important supporters was Archbishop Wulfstan of York, who may have drafted the law code Canute promulgated in Oxford in 1018, announcing the restoration of peace and friendship between the English and the Danes. Although Wulfstan had played a similar role, drafting law codes in Ethelred's government, the Archbishop sought to portray Canute's reign as a return to the days of King Edgar, when a powerful English kingdom was secure from the Scandinavian raids that plagued the reign of his son Ethelred. Wulfstan likely played an important role in drafting the more extensive law code that Canute issued in 1020, which was divided into 2 parts pertaining to ecclesiastical and secular matters, and included further measures to promote Anglo-Scandinavian harmony. Wulfstan was one of several English statesmen who played prominent roles supporting Canute's administration of his realm. In 1018, Canute appointed a young nobleman named Godwin as the Earl of Eastern Wessex. He would later become Earl of the whole of Wessex, perhaps as early as 1020, when Alderman Ethelred of Western Wessex was designated an outlaw, possibly for supporting a rebellion against Canute. In 1022, Godwin accompanied Canute on campaign in Scandinavia and was later married to Githa, the sister of Danish Earl Ulf Thorgilsson. This made Godwin an extended member of the Danish royal family, since Ulf was in turn married to Canute's half-sister Estrid. Godwin underlined his links to Canute's family by naming his eldest sons Swein and Harold after the king's father and grandfather. Godwin would retain his power and influence in the decades after Canute's reign, enabling his son, Harold Godwinson, to become King of England in 1066. Godwin's ascendancy may have been facilitated by the fall of Thorkel the Tall, who had been the leading nobleman in England until Canute outlawed Thorkel and his wife in November 1021. The circumstances behind the Earl's ousting are unclear, but there are suggestions that Thorkel had married a daughter of King Ethelred and had designs on the English throne. In the immediate years after Thorkel's fall, Canute sought to neutralize any residual threat from Thorkel's retainers in East Anglia by making land grants to ecclesiastical institutions in the region. He also awarded a large tract of land in Suffolk to his wife Emma, whose presence may have helped her husband consolidate his authority in eastern England. Thorkel was forced to return to Denmark with 6 ships, but remained a threat to Canute's interests in England and Denmark. In 1022, Canute and Earl Godwin led a campaign in Denmark that compelled Thorkel to come to terms in 1023. The two men were reconciled and brokered a new power-sharing arrangement in which they exchanged their sons as hostages. Thorkel subsequently disappears from the historical record, and a later English source indicates that Thorkel was killed by a mob. By the time of Canute and Godwin's campaign against Thorkel, Canute was already King of Denmark. His brother, King Harold II, had died young in 1019, and Canute sailed to his homeland to receive the Danish crown. As Harold's closest male relative, Canute was likely offered the crown by Danish political elites, but the degree of decentralization in the Danish kingdom suggests that Canute's authority was not entirely secure. The Danish nobility may have also been concerned that Canute would spend much of his time in England and would neglect the government of his homeland. After accepting the Danish crown, Canute had no immediate male relatives and struggled to find a trustworthy figure to serve as his regent in Denmark. Under the terms of Canute's agreement with Thorkel the Tall in 1023, the latter was to govern Denmark alongside one of Canute's sons. By this stage, Canute had 3 sons, Sweyn and Harold from his first wife, Alfufo of Northampton, and Harthacnut from Emma of Normandy. Although Harthacnut was no more than 5 years old at the time, it appears that he was sent to Denmark in 1023 to become Thorkel's ward and continued to hold formal responsibility for the Danish government following Thorkel's death. At this stage, the nobleman Ulf Thorgilsson emerged as the most powerful lord in Denmark and was named Jarl, or Earl of the kingdom. To ensure that Ulf would defend the interests of his dynasty, Canute arranged the marriage between Ulf and his half-sister Estrid, and that of Ulf's sister Githa with Godwin of Wessex. This ensured that Canute had familial ties with his chief lieutenants in both Denmark and England. Although Canute was often absent from Denmark, he would have played an active role in the Danish government while Harthacnut was still in his minority. Even though he spent most of his time in England, it was possible to sail to Jutland from eastern England in 3 days. Canute continued to develop the cities of Viborg, Roskilde and Lund, founded by his father and grandfather. English society was more sophisticated than in Denmark, and Canute imported English craftsmen to support the urban development of his native country. Archaeological evidence of the Anglo-Saxon pottery made from local clay from all 3 sites indicates the presence of an English immigrant community in these cities during Canute's reign. English architects and builders may also have been responsible for building the first stone churches in Denmark. Canute also relied on English moneyers or mint masters to establish mints to produce the earliest royal coinage in Denmark. The extent of English influence in Denmark may have contributed to a major rebellion against Canute in 1026. The main leaders of the rebellion were Canute's brother-in-law, Jarl Ulf, and the latter's brother, Eilaf, whom Canute had appointed as an earl in Mercia, but who had returned to Denmark in 1024. The Danish rebels were supported by King Olaf II Haraldsson of Norway and King Anund Jakob of Sweden. Olaf had seized the Norwegian throne in 1015 and began centralizing his authority over his realm. Anund Jakob had succeeded his father, Olof Skjutkonung, to the Swedish throne in 1022 and allied with Norway in an effort to curb the rising power of Denmark under Canute. The coalition force attacked Sjælland and Skåne in summer 1026, hoping to strike quickly before Canute could respond, since the latter was preparing to travel to Rome to attend the coronation of the Holy Roman Emperor in early 1027. Canute responded quickly by raising loyal English and Danish troops and brought his enemies to battle at the river Helgeå in present-day Sweden. While the land battle near the river was inconclusive and Canute had to withdraw, he blockaded the Öresund, trapping the Swedes and the Norwegians in the Baltic Sea. After leaving the blockading fleet in the hands of trusted men, Canute proceeded with his plans to travel to Rome. The Norwegians were low on provisions and were forced to return home by land during the winter. Canute's visit to Rome in 1027 gave him an international stature that set him apart from most of his predecessors in England and Denmark. As the ruler of 2 kingdoms in northern Europe, Canute was one of the most powerful men on the continent and an attractive ally for Conrad II, King of Germany, who was due to be crowned Holy Roman Emperor in Rome at Easter 1027. Timothy Bolton suggests that Conrad may also have been seeking to ease tensions with a potential rival. Through his mother, Canute was related to the Piast dynasty in Poland, who were often in conflict with the East German duchies. Following Conrad's election as King of Germany in 1024, Canute began giving gifts to Duke William V of Aquitaine in western France, possibly as part of an international effort to encourage William to seek election as King of Italy and obtain a claim to the imperial title. William soon recognized that his prospects were limited and withdrew his candidacy. As Conrad prepared to leave for Italy, his invitation for Canute to visit Rome served as an olive branch, and gave them an opportunity to discuss important political matters. In a letter to his English subjects during his return voyage, Canute offers a detailed description of his visit to the Eternal City, where he visited the shrines of Saints Peter and Paul and other important religious sites. Alongside King Rudolf III of Burgundy, Canute had the honour of witnessing Conrad's consecration as emperor by Pope John XIX, and he was proud to have been received with great honour by the emperor and a host of noble dignitaries from across the continent. As part of his discussions with Pope and Emperor, Canute secured concessions for English pilgrims travelling to Rome, as well as archbishops who journeyed to Rome to receive their episcopal pallium from the Pope. Canute may have also persuaded the Pope to recognise his uncle Bolesław's elevation from Duke to King of Poland in 1025. Other sources describe Canute and Conrad conducting their business on friendly terms, and the emperor ceded to him imperial lands in Schleswig as a gesture of goodwill. The alliance between Conrad and Canute was later strengthened with the betrothal of Canute's daughter Gunhilda to Conrad's son Henry, the future Holy Roman Emperor Henry III. After spending some 2 weeks in the emperor's company in Rome, Canute returned to Denmark, where he had unfinished business in the wake of the rebellion by the brothers Ulf and Eilaf. Canute's blockade of the Øresund had destroyed the Norwegian army and forced the Swedes to come to terms, leaving the Danish rebels highly exposed. Following his return from Rome, Canute convened an assembly in Roskilde and began to purge the Danish aristocracy of the rebel leaders. Jarl Ulf was executed, while his brother Eilaf also disappears from the historical record. Canute remained in Denmark for several months, consolidating the power of his son Harthacnut, who was given the regency of Denmark. Having eliminated his rivals in Denmark, Canute now set his sights on King Olaf of Norway, whom he identified as his arch-rival in Scandinavia. After returning to England, Canute forged alliances with exiled Norwegian nobles who had opposed Olaf. While Canute's trusted ally Erik Hakonsson appears to have died in 1023, his son Hakon Eriksson served the king faithfully as Earl of Worcester and had substantial interests in Norway that he inherited from his father and uncle. In 1027, Canute also received a visit from the Norwegian warlord Erling Skjalgsson, the leader of the opposition to Olaf's centralizing initiatives. Canute raised a fleet and sailed to Norway in 1028 along with his Norwegian allies. The destruction of the Norwegian forces after the Battle of Hellio left Olaf weakened, and the defection of important courtiers such as Olaf's kinsman and advisor Karl Arnason left the king with no choice but to flee into exile. Canute was recognized as King of Norway and left Hakon Eriksson as regent of the kingdom before his return to England in 1029. Canute was now in his mid-30s and the master of a vast North Sea empire incorporating the kingdoms of England, Denmark, and Norway. He had sat on the English and Danish thrones for over a decade and had consolidated his power in both kingdoms by defeating rebellions against his rule and eliminating his enemies. Peace and security at home was accompanied by recognition abroad following the agreements he made with the Emperor and the Pope in Rome in 1027, which broke down barriers to trade with the continent. Although his father and grandfather had both ruled over Denmark and Norway, the fullest demonstration of Canute's statesmanship was in England, where he created a new Anglo-Scandinavian aristocracy to maintain the political order that he had restored after decades of instability. The most important member of Canute's court was his queen, Emma of Normandy. Aside from the symbolic continuity from the court of King Ethelred, Emma was an important political figure in her own right. From 1020 onwards, she was listed alongside or after the king in his royal charters, and her key position at court is also attested to in a famous picture from the Liber Vitae, produced in Winchester in 1031, where she is shown alongside her husband holding a cross. By the 1030s, Canute's government was dominated by Earl Godwin in Wessex and Earl Leofric in Mercia, who appeared at the top of the list of earls from 1032 until the end of Canute's reign. While Godwin was a new man who owed his ascendancy to his loyalty and family ties with Canute, which survived the execution of his brother-in-law Ulf Thorgilsson, Leofric came from a well-established English aristocratic family and worked hard to gain Canute's trust during the 1020s. Leofric is best known in English folklore as the husband of Godyifu, better known as Lady Godiva, who rode nude through the streets of Coventry to persuade her husband to lower taxes on his subjects. By creating two powerful earls in Godwin and Leofric, Canute ensured that each would prevent the other from becoming too powerful, thus preventing a challenge to royal authority. By 1033, Godwin and Leofric were joined by Seward, Earl of Northumbria, a Scandinavian nobleman who controlled much of northern England. Seward would go on to lead a campaign against the Scottish King Macbeth in the 1050s, thus earning himself a place in Shakespeare's play. Other Scandinavian elites who were prominent at Canute's court are largely absent from official records, but are known through their graves in Winchester's New Minster. A large Scandinavian presence at Canute's court is also implied from the skaldic poetry commissioned by Canute and performed for him in England. While Canute was increasingly secure in England and Denmark, his control of Norway was at risk within months of his conquest when his regent Hakon Eriksson died in a shipwreck. The death of the regent encouraged Olaf II to launch an attempt to reclaim his throne. Olaf remained unpopular and led a small army, including his teenage half-brother Harald Sigurdsson. They were easily defeated by a superior force commanded by Norwegian chieftains Kalf Arneson and Thorir Hunt at the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030. Olaf was captured and executed on the battlefield, an act which elicited sympathy for the late king. Harald was left for dead on the battlefield but managed to escape and take refuge at the court of Yaroslav the Wise in Kiev. Canute did not trust any of the Norwegian lords to govern the kingdom in his interests and dispatched his eldest son Sweyn to Norway as regent. Sweyn was in his mid-teens and accompanied by Mother Alfhifu of Northampton. They set out to placate the Norwegian nobility and encouraged the development of the cult of Saint Olaf, who was venerated as a Christian martyr. Sweyn and Alfhifu struggled to enforce Danish rule in Norway and faced several rebellions. In 1034, they were forced to flee to Denmark when Kalf Arneson led a coup that brought Olaf's illegitimate son Magnus Olafsson to the throne. Canute remained King of England and Denmark, but any hopes he had of consolidating his Anglo-Danish empire or of reclaiming the Norwegian throne ended with his unexpected death on the 12th of November 1035 when he was in his early 40s. The fact that most of Canute's immediate family died in their 20s and 30s indicates that the family suffered from a hereditary health condition. Canute was buried at the Old Minster at Winchester, where he lay among many Anglo-Saxon kings of England and Wessex. Canute's eldest son, Swein, died shortly after being expelled from Norway, leaving him with 2 surviving sons, Harold Harefoot, his younger son with Alfhifu, and Harthacnut, his son with Emma. Since Canute left no instructions for the succession, his demise precipitated a power struggle among his 2 sons. Harthacnut was firmly in control in Denmark, but the English crown was still up for grabs. As the 2 queens sought to advance the claims of their respective sons, the kingdom's 2 main power brokers, Godwin and Leofric, were also split, with the former favouring Harthacnut and the latter supporting Harold. By 1037, Harold Harefoot was widely recognised as King of England. When Godwin of Wessex sought to demonstrate his fealty to Harold, he was instead blinded and imprisoned. A few years later, Harold died in March 1040, and Harthacnut was invited to take the throne vacated by his half-brother. Harthacnut left his cousin Sweyn Estridsson in charge of Denmark, but his reign as King of England was short-lived, and he died on the 8th of June 1042. Canute's dynastic line had been extinguished less than a decade after his death. The English throne passed to Edward the Confessor, the son of Ethelred and Emma of Normandy, while King Magnus of Norway seized the Danish kingdom and had ambitions to re-establish the North Sea Empire by conquering England. When Magnus died in 1047, Denmark reverted to Sweyn Estridsson, while Norway was inherited by Magnus's uncle Harald Sigurdsson, whose draconian rule over the kingdom would earn him the memorable nickname Harald Hardrada, Harald the Hard Ruler. Canute was one of the most powerful kings of medieval Europe. As the second son of King Sweyn of Denmark, Canute made his name as a conqueror, following in his father's footsteps by successfully invading England in 1016. Although he had to face down rebellions against his rule, Canute was a talented statesman who positioned himself as the successor of the Wessex dynasty by establishing himself in London and Winchester, marrying Emma of Normandy, and creating a new Anglo-Scandinavian aristocracy that owed their power to his rule. Canute spent most of his time in England, but he played an active role in consolidating his dynasty's power in Denmark and proved a talented military strategist after defeating a coalition of Norwegians, Swedes, and Danish rebels by blockading the Øresund. He added Norway to his collection of kingdoms by leading an expedition to expel Olaf II, although he never succeeded in consolidating control over the kingdom. Canute was well respected throughout the European continent, as attested by the acclaim he received during his visit to Rome in 1027 and his cordial relations with Emperor Conrad II and Pope John XIX. He was hailed by Scandinavian contemporaries as Canute the Great, making him the only king of England besides Alfred the Great to be honoured by the epithet. Despite his great power, Canute is perhaps best known in English folklore for his part in the legend of King Canute and the Waves. In most retellings, Canute was sitting on his throne at the beach and ordered the waves to retreat. His exhortations came to nothing as the waves returned and splashed his feet, revealing himself as a foolish and arrogant king who believed he could control nature. This apocryphal tale first appears in the 12th century Historia Anglorum by Henry of Huntingdon. In the original version, Canute's display serves as a gesture of humility before his courtiers and a recognition that he is powerless before God. The death of Canute and his 3 sons between 1034 and 1042 was the ultimate demonstration of his powerlessness before the Almighty. Nevertheless, Canute's 2-decade reign had a direct impact on some of the most important events in English history. His English ally, Godwin of Wessex, dominated Edward the Confessor's government and brokered Edward's marriage to his daughter Edith of Wessex. When Edward died childless in January 1066, the English nobles elected Harold Godwinson as their new king. Harold spent much of the summer preparing to meet a challenge from Duke William of Normandy, who claimed the English throne via his great-aunt Emma of Normandy. Before William could set sail, Harold faced an invasion in the north from the King of Norway. Harold Hardrada, who had built his reputation as Europe's foremost warrior in the service of Yaroslav the Wise in Kiev and the Varangian Guard in Constantinople prior to becoming King of Norway, was encouraged by Canute's example to invade England. His bold enterprise ended in September 1066 when he fell in battle against Harold Godwinson's army at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. William landed in southern England shortly thereafter and defeated Harold at the Battle of Hastings on the 14th of October 1066. Even after the Norman conquest, the kings of Denmark hoped to revive Canute's Anglo-Scandinavian empire and launched 3 unsuccessful campaigns against England in 1069, 1075, and 1083. What do you think of King Canute? Was he one of the most effective kings of medieval Europe whose legacy has been overshadowed by the Norman conquest of 1066? Could his Anglo-Scandinavian empire have endured had he and his sons lived longer, or was the prospect of a permanent Anglo-Danish union always unrealistic? Please, let us know in the comment section. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.